So let's go ahead and go. So today's presentation, we really want to focus on two things simultaneously. We want to give you some insight into the world of organization design. When it comes to HR and organization design, I'm just going to be blunt, and you are the shoemaker's children, right? The businesses most often probably turn to you and say, we need to redesign, and then you immediately focus on people. And I can tell you it's that journey of which Ram talked about yesterday, of let's just put in cross-functional teams and have immediate information flow, and let's just flatten. And like that journey is fraught with risk, right? And it's not businesses are complicated, we're complicated, right? We're complicated. And when you're dealing with power and status and who reports to who, and personality, things can go pear-shaped, as my colleagues in the UK will say. So one of the things that we want to focus on is giving you some wisdoms around organization design, or what we call an operating model, and I'll define that here in a second. The other thing we want to focus on is the work that Alistair did and his team and leading through Kingfisher to a completely different HR operating model, and tell you the story about that and let you kind of just ask him lots of questions because he's full of insight and full of wisdom. And we have some slides prepared for that, but we can kind of move fast and slow. So we'll take some time today to set the context about Kingfisher. We'll introduce to you the model, show you what it looks like. And we'll talk about when how is more important than what. And what that basically means is your approach and how you take things on is as important as what gets done. And we'll spend some time with that and then pull together lots of tips and wisdoms. This work, organization design work, applies to both large multinationals as well as local businesses. So if you're thinking, oh, that's a large multinational or Kingfisher's massive, this is one case study out of 450 that we've done, of which applies to small businesses as well as large multinationals. So with that said, you want to go forward one more? I don't think I need to say anything else to you about On the Mark 30 years ago. All we do is design work and redesign work, either upskilling, and we partner with you, we'll do it for you, or we'll do it with you behind the scenes so that you can then do it for yourselves. One more time, if you wouldn't mind. And this tells you a little bit about what we've done, where we've done it, and who we've done it for. There's a whole lot more than that, but just to kind of build some credibility, what gives us the right to be here, gives you a little background. Alistair, one last thing.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about what we mean by an operating model. So some of you, how many of you received, show of hands, had some kind of training in organization design? Because org development and org design are not the same, even though I'm a professional in both industries. So thank you for raising your hand. So you'll probably recognize this based on Jay Galbraith's work, is an operating model is basically all these elements in that thing we call the STAR model. And it includes everything to do with a business direction. The value stream is about the work that creates value for your customers. It's not all the nonsense work that we do. It's not the glue work that Ram referred to yesterday about gluing things up together. It's about the work, how we organize the work, how we organize jobs and roles and people. And then the management systems is everything from compliance to technology to management roles. And of course, you see your traditional HR processes. One of the things you should know is I am of the school and of the practice that you can't change culture by throwing in programs. You either design for the culture you want or you get what you get. And so most of our customers, when they come to us, not only want to make sure that they're fit for purpose in terms of the operating model, but they also want to make sure that the culture changes with that. And we're of the practice that those two things have to happen simultaneously, not later on, not one then the other. And I'll come back to that more.
Let me just talk for 2 seconds and give you some context on Kingfisher. Quite a large organization from a people side. You can see here. Actually, the truth is, I had no idea how many colleagues we had. I mean, our master data was shot. Probably, I don't know yours is, but we couldn't tell. And I had an argument last night with someone at dinner about it. We didn't even know how many people we were paying sometimes. So it just gives you a sense there were things wrong. Big organization, lots of countries, lots of different brands. So we had different brands in Poland, we had different brands in UK. I heard a British voice earlier over here somewhere. So we owned a company called B&Q, Screwfix, some very, very successful, some not so successful. One of the reasons that we went into this work was because actually, as a company, we actually had to change ourselves completely. We had a new CEO, probably one of the best CEOs I've ever worked with, a lady called Veronique Lowry. And if you ever get to meet her, she's one of the most inspiring leaders of any organization I've ever had the pleasure of being in. She had a vision, and she said, you know, we've got all these different brands, and so just to give you a context, in an American world, we were the sort of the competitors to Home Depot. So Home Depot was this side of the world, we owned the other side of the world from a home improvement point of view. But we owned it in a very, very disparate way with the different brands. And she said, you know, we need to fundamentally rethink. Why? Because it's all about customer experience. It's all about what does the customer experience, not just in store, but online, and actually, what does the customer experience when they've done the project, the DIY project? Just as a matter of interest, what percentage of DIY projects do you think fail? It's about 60%. And the other incredible statistic I can never get my head around, what nationality is the most successful at DIY? France. Yeah, that's what I said. Really? So, we had this big change. And you know, on the slide here, you see things pop up. I'm not, you know, you don't have to read it all. But one of them was to really optimize our structures and our operations. We had duplication, we had processes on top of processes, we had master data, we had SAP that didn't work. Yeah, I hear that. I hear that a lot. And when you think about what we were doing, we had 1,500 stores around the globe, and they were all not really learning and growing from each other. And so one of the key things about the vision for the company was customer experience. We really want, and I said it before, you know, we really wanted to make sure that all of our customers, however and wherever the touch points were, that experience was brilliant. But actually, we also realized in thinking about that in order to deliver great customer experience, we really needed to deliver absolutely fantastic colleague experience. And you know, when we looked at it in the cold light of day, we were really delivering rubbish colleague experience. And we sort of thought about it for a while, and then we sort of came up with this diagram that nobody likes. And in the company, people looked at it and said, "What the hell is that?" But what it was something really important to the team that was working on this, and basically saying, there's a mirror. And whatever you do for customer, you've got to enable colleague. And in order to enable colleague, actually the experience they get has to be just as good. And that's really what that was about. One other thing, which you may find startling and shocking, if you add all this up, we had about 1,500 people in HR dotted around. And that's quite a lot. Do the maths, if you think about the ratio. And that's what they were all doing. And you can see in the different brands. Let me see if this works. And sorry, over there, I have to do it over here as well. I haven't got two dibbly things. But what you can see over here is the different bars or the different colors represent different activities that the HR colleagues were doing. And so in some brands, they were spending all their time recruiting. In others, they were doing workforce administration and so on and so forth. And if we wanted to create one brand selling the same products but at different target groups. We really had to think about how the heck did we pull this together? And then we met Mark. Now, as a rule, I hate consultants, but he's okay, honestly. And that's where I'm going to hand back to you.
Clearly, my mom got to him. Alistair, you should talk a little bit before I go about why you chose to get HR ahead of the business. Maybe a few words.
Yeah, if you go back to what we were trying to do as a whole as a company, if you're trying to change everything, I mean literally everything in the company, we said we've got to be ahead of the game, so we better change first. We've really got to sort of understand what we need to do to help the organization. At the same time, we need to make sure that we are delivering the right things for our colleagues. So it was all about getting ahead of the game.
Okay, so you guys have seen this probably 2 or 3 times already over the last 24 hours. It's just a standard employee experience. Gallup's writing about it, SHRM's writing about it, everyone's kind of writing about the employee experience. And the only reason I put this up here is because we had to start from a basis of what Alistair and Kingfisher call the colleague experience and really understanding that. And I think that's key for us. Do you want to take this here?
Yeah. I think it was Josh. Josh set us up brilliantly for this, actually. We did this piece of work. We'd actually mapped customer experience, and I don't know if any of you have tried to do this. We actually mapped customer journeys in a store. How many customer journeys do you think there were in a store? It's about 600 we mapped. Whether that be buying a light bulb, or buying a project, or trying to get advice or whatever, 600. So then we said, you know what, we better map from a colleague experience, what are the moments that matter in a colleague's life cycle? And none of this will be new to you because it's intuitive, but we involved a whole bunch of people. It wasn't HR that did this. It was all of our colleagues that we involved in many, many workshops to actually map what were the moments that mattered for them. And we then threw that against the customer journeys and said, well, if we know we've got to deliver this and we've got to deliver this, how the heck do we now organize in order to be able to pull the two together?
You want to talk?
Oh, one more, yeah. So we've never done this before. We also looked fundamentally at this, which was over on the left-hand side, top left-hand side, we sort of realized there's a whole bunch of stuff that we should be doing the same. And, you know, the size of the bubble represented the amount of people that were doing that type of activity. And on the right side, especially the far right-hand side, that was the activity we realized that would really make a difference in the future. And what you can also see is, actually in comparison, there were very, very few people really doing the activity that made a difference. I mean, you would have thought Kingfisher's been around for 50, 60 years. You would have thought we would have sort of got it right, but we were astonished when we actually got the raw data out.
So some of the wisdoms here that we're not going to go over each one, so just kind of from the starting point, a few wisdoms for you to think about is where we started with Kingfisher and Alistair was pulling all the data together saying, what is the current operating model for HR? Where does it work? Where does it not work? Where does it fall down? And you may be a little surprised when we talk about an operating model, as Stephen had said earlier, one of the last things we talk about is people. In fact, we have these t-shirts on our team that says we don't care about people, but yet at the same time when you have 100 people in the room redesigning their own work, obviously we care a lot about people. But what we don't care about is, in the current operating model, is we don't care about what Lisa does, or Emily, or Kristen, or Joe. We want to know what work is done and how the work moves through the organization and understanding it in this totality. It's one of the very important things. In order for you to get real change in the organization, you can never start with people because you'll always be stuck. Alistair, do you want to highlight any of these for yourself?
I think the one that really shocked my colleagues was the third one, actually, was the sacred cows. We had a few sacred cows, so let me put one out there. We had business partners. That was a sacred cow. And I'm going to come back to that when I show the model, because we killed the role. And I'll leave it there and come back later on. But that was an example.
Well, this is an example. This
of
is an example of the shoemaker's children, right? With HRs, typically a CHR will take a 3-box model and they'll kind of look at right and they'll say, okay, this team you go in there, this team you go in there, and this team you go in there. The problem with that is that's easy. That's simple to do. That's not redesign. That's just shuffling chairs around the table, right? And the problem with that is all the rest of the design work is not done. And then the 3-box model, people get into power struggles. Who's more important? Who owns the customer? Who owns that work? Where does the pass-off happen? All that nonsense, which actually just drives in complication, cost, and inefficiency into an operating model, right? And go ahead.
I was going to say, it really also led into lots of conversations that we had with senior leaders in the organization. Senior leaders loved people that could come and fix their problems. But the trouble with that was it would then create dissonance in the process. That added complication. But actually part of the process in talking to senior colleagues was to get their buy-in, to recognize that the biggest transformation of the lot, actually, if I look back now, was giving HR responsibility back to the organization. You know, and taking control over everybody in the organization. So that was huge, and we didn't realize we were doing it at the time. So
Alistair's, one of the favorite mantra, he had many, but one of them that continues to stick with me is he talked about HR reinventing work that the business never needs. I'm not saying we're talking about anybody in this room or any of your HR organizations, but he kept saying we need to stop this nonsense because it's not what the business needs. Maybe we can expand on that.
Yeah, I will, but you and I need to move on in a minute.
Okay, that's good. I do want to make one last, I just met him last night at the train station. I asked him if he wanted to do a presentation with me. I do want to highlight one thing, is one of the 3 reasons redesign projects fail is because of you don't do enough stakeholder work. Here's the wisdom. Everybody in an organization, including your CEO, reports to somebody. And part of the organization design work isn't just the design work, but it's managing and preparing stakeholders and making sure you're completely aligned with that. Because if you get ahead of those people you report to and you do something, they can stop those things in a nanosecond.
Last point here, which is really important. Don't trust HR to redesign HR. Because you might get an extrapolation of the past. So let's move on to the model.
Okay, you can just handle this. You can handle this if you want.
No, you do it.
Okay, got it. So I've already mentioned it. So in the social sciences, there's something called first order change, second order change, right? So actually, it was a perfect cue for me, which Alistair is saying you shouldn't have HR, redesign HR. It's almost like doing family therapy on your own family. Anyone's ever tried to do that? Let us know how successful you are. Right? We call that first order change. It's basically moving chairs around the table. The table's the same, the chair's the same, but in essence, you just have a different view. You want to go ahead and click one? So one of the things that has stood out to me for the conference is everybody's talking about leadership and inclusion and diversity and our people are our most important asset, and you got programs outside, HR programs. Here's the issue. If you try to piecemeal and program your way through trying to fix an operating model, right, you're never going to get there, and you're only going to create more complication. So one of the fundamental questions has to be is, are we fit for purpose? Are we set up to do all those things that we want to do and integrate them rather than just putting them on top? Next slide. So there's something we call second order change, which is basically changing the playing field. We don't need that room, we don't need that table. Forget about the window, let's knock out the wall. Let's do what we need to do as long as it's aligned with the true north of the business, right? And that becomes very important, which is why when you do it yourself, the last thing you're going to do is probably do something very different. You might make tweaks here and there, but it won't be anything different. And that's what I just said, so you can move on. Lastly, this is a STAR model you saw earlier. What I want to emphasize on this is, as you think about your own organizations and you're making changes. So for example, how many of you have lean process improvement going on in your organization somewhere in some shape or form? Okay? That has to do with value stream work. How many of you are talking about customers and omni-channel and how do we service our customers better? Raise your hand. Okay, good. How many of you are talking about agility, holacracy, flattening our organizations? Let's get cross-functional teams working. Raise your hand. Okay, how many of you are talking about digitalization, AI, technology? So what we just did on this, right, is you're ripe for a redesign. Because what you've done now is you're saying we're making changes to every aspect of our business, which is core. Now, my question to you is, who is looking to make sure, look at the word middle of the STAR model, who's making sure that it all fits together and reinforces each other? Or are you functionalizing your way through programs that basically are just maybe sub-optimizing the entire operating model? This is critical, and I think this is part of the HR leadership role. You need to be looking at the whole changes, all the changes, not just the people stuff. Right? Those days are gone. You need to be looking at the whole operating model and saying, how does it all fit together? The left and the right hand, making sure they're joined up.
One of the key things that we did was actually talk about what's our North Star. What's the HR true north? What's the HR or the people strategy? And I come from organizations that have got people strategies that thick. Our people strategy was simply those 3 sentences. We as an employer had a responsibility to provide a place where people could be themselves and be at their best. And that also meant that they knew what was expected of them, and they were part of creating that. We had a responsibility to build skills for life, not skills for Kingfisher. So we took the view that if you work for Kingfisher, we had to give you skills for life. And then the last one was the one which is most difficult to explain, but basically the way I explain it is when you go home at your end of week, and let's assume your end of week is a Friday night, most weeks you actually, having had a glass of red or a beer or whatever your tipple is, you actually think to yourself, you know what, I'm getting far more than I'm giving. And that was our people strategy. It's as simple as that. But actually it's really complicated because when you think about it, that drives all the focus, that drives all the tactics. But that was our North Star, and we kept on coming back to it in the design. So this is the model. I mean, it's really overwhelming. I know British humor doesn't really work.
That is British humor, by the way. That's sarcasm for those who didn't get it.
Basically, we said, what's the value chain of people? And, you know, it starts with understanding what the problem is, designing a solution, planning how to do it and implement it, then implementing it and then embedding it. And we spent a lot of time arguing that, but the conclusion was, that's what we have to do. And then we said, so how do we organize? So we simply said, we'll organize like this. We're going to organize in 4 sausages. And we used that word, actually, because we wanted to break the language. Sausage number 1 is join. So this is all to do with, all the way from how do you even attract people, all the way through to the fact they're onboarded and they have a license to operate. In other words, they're ready to go. That now sits with the join community. And each of these has a head that reports to me.
Head sausage.
Head sausage. I never thought of that, actually. Contribute is all about day-to-day transactional type activity. And if you were smart enough to look at the graph I showed you that had those bubbles on it, we had about 60% of our people in HR working in contribute, which is way, 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 way too much of a percentage. But it encompasses things like reward, and I'll actually show you in the next slide, I'll show you how we scattered things through. But we also didn't have, for example, shared services at that point. So shared services also sat there. And then grow. Grow is all about actually making sure that we understood what learning programs we needed, what development opportunities we needed. How did we handle promotion? How did we identify and deal with how you seek talent, how you promote talent, how you give talent opportunity? And then the last one was move on. Because actually in an organization, I heard it, someone gave a horrible statistic this morning that I think it was 60% of a workforce was turning over. Thankfully, we weren't that bad. But, we realized that one of the things that we weren't doing well enough was following people once they moved on. And people leave, they've done 3, 4, 5 years. For those of you who read Shakespeare, I call it the Shylock principle. They've given their pound of flesh, and they've got a pound of flesh in return, and they see some future opportunity. But we realized, and I don't know if it's true in your industry, it's certainly true in the next industry I went to, people just go round. They've done Kingfisher, then they go to HRM, then they go to somewhere else, and bingo, they come back to Kingfisher. And what we decided to do was actually follow them, track them, talk to them, and bring them back sooner. So this was move on. And actually, the model in the end turned out that we moved move on into join. So that you got that sort of circular economy, if you like. And then, where's the business partner? Well, the business partner became chief understand person. And their role was to really sit with the business and really understand what was going on and what was needed. They also had input here, and input here, but we gave them no authority to design because they fiddled. What we also did with the model is say, look, if this is how we're going to organize centrally, and in my central team in Kingfisher, we had about 24, 25 people. So it was really quite thin at the middle. It was really fat in the operating units. But what we also did was actually say in the operating units, you have to use the same model. And so if I took you to a brand, like say I took you to Castorama in Poland, the people who work in Contribute in Poland actually had to work in conjunction with the middle and everybody else. And that forced collaboration. It also cut out a lot of the nonsense that we were doing. I don't know how many, and this is anarchic. We had a look at our competence models. And I don't know how many of you have got competence models.
How do you feel about competence models?
They're a waste of time. And so we chucked them out. And it was only as a result of doing this that we realized there was so much that we were inventing or reinventing. And so, for our colleagues, many of them, this went down a bit like a lead balloon because they had said all their careers, well, I want to do this and I want to invent. That's what motivates me. And all of a sudden we were saying, yeah, you can invent, but you have to do it now in conjunction with everybody else. And you have to be what we call a player learner. You have to play, you play to win, but at the same time, you better learn from each other.
Alistair, let me make a couple points here. And sorry to interrupt. The embed part had, and it's a mistake that's often made because when we do a redesign, particularly of HR, we just have functional thinking. We're just going to think about HR, but even in the 3-box model, the line manager's role completely shifts. And we typically leave that for later, right? Self-service, all those things that used to do in the old HR days now move to the line manager and even more. In this model, that work was critical. So the embed work was giving the tools, the tips, the techniques, the know-how for the line leaders in the store to do the work that they needed to do. Am I speaking out of turn?
You're absolutely right. And the last thing I would say about the model, I mean, I could speak for hours on this, but the last thing I would say was it got rid of COEs as well. Because the COEs had become not just centers of expertise, they had become centers of, I want to design what I want to design, and I'll throw it at the organization and see if it wants it. And so actually, although people are now working in sausages, they're only doing it because the understand people have said, this is what we need. Okay. I said I'd give you just quickly, it doesn't really do it justice, this, but you can see the types of activity that went in or go in whichever sausage. And believe you me, we spent days.
Before you go on, remember I talked about work is not the same as people? So we identified all the value-creating work that had to happen with each one of these steps in the employee or the colleague experience. Said what needs to be done, and we mapped that work, and we also got to the level of saying what is the FTE of work, which is the FTE of work is not the same as FTE of people. So in other words, what's the work demand that's going to be put on each one of join, contribute, grow that they have to be prepared to deliver. So it's down, I know I'm getting into a lot of level of detail, but anyway, let's keep moving.
And then I just want to highlight one thing here, the Good Home Academy. Someone talked this morning about academy. Yeah, we did the same. We've created an academy, but that wasn't, so we had people working here that were not HR people. This was business leaders that came and they were working. So we had a virtual academy, if you like, with 2 or 3 permanent people, but it was creating, you know, again, as I said, it was throwing a lot of HR responsibility or people responsibility back to where it belongs, which is in the business. I put this slide up. I dreaded putting this slide up because it's very old-fashioned. And actually, our organization didn't really look like this in the end. But the reason we put it up was basically to say, here's the new organization. So you had 1, 2, head of move on and join, head of contribute, head of grow, head of understand plan, and then I had the internal communications. And then actually in the markets, these were the chief understand people in the market. So no longer was it a chief people officer of B&Q or a chief people officer of Brico Depot. It was actually the chief understand body because we were trying to change job titles.
And we extricated all HR roles and jobs out of every store. Right. So which of course, if you think about it from an implementation perspective, you cannot go from 0 to 60 in a nanosecond, right? You've got to do that implementation very deliberately. So I'm not saying they just went from one day and that whole idea of flipping the light switch on from lovely technology transformations. There's no such thing in organization design. You need to think about how do you prepare people and get them ready to go so that you can make a transition while you're flying the plane.
So as you can see here, at the end, for the moments that mattered, we actually had ownership. And we knew where that ownership lay. Just to give you a figure, as I said, we started up here. Actually, that figure, you have to add 226 people that we took out even before we came up with that figure. And we're down here.
Now, it wasn't was not a reduction in force. But when you start with the work and you look at what the work has to be done to create value, and you start to standardize that work and saying we're going to use common tools, we're going to use common ways of working, we're going to leave the creativity up for other things, but be very deliberate about where we want that creativity. I think from an FTE of work, I think we cut out about 50% of the work demand on the organization from its current state. So you can see the numbers they got to is quite significant.
And then lastly, we put in resource where the resource was needed. The challenge was actually many of the people, unfortunately, we couldn't reskill. It was impossible to reskill.
Alistair, before you go forward, for those technologists in the room, is this model, when you do an operating model, it's not just about people, because work also gets done by technology, right? So AI, digitalization, automation work. we had to count all that work too, which is because those projects were going on simultaneously. So what we mapped was what work is done today by human, what work is going to be done by machine or by technology, because that's still work that needs to be tracked.
Good point. So what was the wisdom? So what were the key learnings? Well, you can look up here. Mark, any you want to pick out?
I think, well, there's so many. A couple I've already said. I think the one thing that I would, we're going to address this in just a few minutes, on the courage to start with a clean sheet. Obviously, I owe that to Alistair, and Alistair had to get backing of the business in Vera to be able to do that work. But I guess I can't say enough about that to get there. You pick one?
Yeah, the other one I would pick is to be relentless in pursuit of truth. We kept on asking why? And we kept on asking our business colleagues, why do you really want this? What will it do? What will it do? What do you not want? And it was just this I was about to say incestuous. Is that the right word?
Yeah, that's not the right word.
Don't think that's the right word.
That is not the right word.
This relentless pursuit of the truth. Right, we are running out of time, and we are between you and drinks. So
and Stephen, just to check it out here, I've got, how much time do we have left? 3 minutes, okay. Good. So let's talk about how, I'm going to move quickly.
Yeah.
Mind? So let's talk about how is more important than what. So this is, again, goes back to the shoemaker's children. And why HR redesigns or any redesigns fail. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. Is that functional kind of thinking? It's just within my boundaries. If you think about the work that HR does, you do not do this in a silo. There's upstream work, there's downstream. You think laterally across the business. I think the implementation that I said earlier, you can't just throw people into new teams and say, get on with it, and wonder why they're struggling later. It's ridiculous to think, but it happens all the time. On a more positive note, a couple things I guess I'll want to highlight here is be honest with yourself about what do you really know about organization design and what do you not know, right? And really being honest with yourself. Can you do it? It's complex. It's a complex solution. Being clear about your true north. This is the thing that you have to take inspiration for. So we've talked about diversity. We talked about inclusion. Personally, I think most businesses who say our people are our most important asset, while they may believe it, I think they're kidding themselves, right? You want proof? Look at how you go about redesigning yourselves, making large change initiatives. Are your people involved in that process and doing it themselves? Or do you have ants on a picnic basket approach? Somebody comes in, crawls around, comes out with a PowerPoint slide and say, here, do this, right? There's a place for it. Maybe you can talk to how many people you involved in.
There was, in the initial work, there were over 100. And then actually, as we went through, we must have involved 400 or 500 different colleagues I was actually talking to Mark yesterday about how many people days that we involved in this, and it ran into the thousands to create this.
So for Kingfisher, the colleague experience was everything because it aligned directly to the customer experience, right? And Alistair was clear about, think about involvement of people doing real work. This is not fake brainstorming processes that we're talking about. We're talking about people making decisions about the future operating model who are in the current operating model. It's a pay now, pay later equation. The data shows us that you can get a 25% faster ROI, and you get more stickiness, right? You'll hear people talk about stickiness. What's gonna last longer? When you do it, when you have a hand and blood, sweat, equity investment in what you did, or when someone came in and said, do this, right? Which one's gonna stick more? And it's so, for enlightened leaders such as Alistair and others who have some emotional intelligence and recognize the value of it's a pay now, pay later equation, and pay later a whole lot if we do it the wrong way, it's an important option.
I joked a bit about consultants, but actually one of the other key wisdoms was building the trust and actually following the process that Mark and his colleagues took us through. There were times when it would have been dead easy to jump off and say enough. But to stick through that process and to get the support was absolutely incredible and very, very valuable to the business. And it's only now, funnily enough, if I talk to my colleagues that I've just sadly had to leave behind, this has been a great success for them, a great success.
So I'm hosting a dinner this evening. We have a webinar on this in January. We've got a case study coming out. If you want more information, just let me know on the conference app. But just an FYI if you want to talk more about this.
And if you want more, ask him, because I'm busy.
All right, don't move. Stay right there. Alistair, why don't you take a chair? Why don't you bring that slide, Phil, back on the wisdom? You can go back.
There were two wisdoms.
No, there was one really good wisdom. Go back.
Only one?
That was a little cheap shot. Anyway, you can figure it out. Go back two wisdoms. So let's open it up for questions. Yeah,
right here.
I love that one. So here we go. We need to get microphones going. So here we go. Here's Pilar. Fantastic.
Thank you for asking them to go back to the wisdoms, because that's where my question was. Oh, wait, don't lose it.
Stay
it was
on the
number
wisdom.
2, the wisdom about the COEs and the business. Can you just expand on that a little bit? You kind of went through that a little bit fast. I want to make sure I'm tracking.
Let me go first, and then in the 3-box model, Ulrich's 3-box model in his original book, and now 4 boxes or 5 boxes, is the business partner. If you look at that, the way that why I say that model is fragmented and sub-optimizes and not fit for purpose is because the business partners have work that they have to do. And they probably think they own the relationship with the customers and the COEs. The COEs design, governance, maybe policy, design stuff, and then you have your center transactions, which is payroll and other stuff. One of the mistakes that's made is, number one is, where does the power lie in that operating model, right? And that answer for most, anytime we walk into a 3-box model, I'll ask the CHRO, where's the power lie? Who makes the decision, 51% of the decision about what the customer gets? And there's always a bun fight, again, as the Brits talk about it, as to who's more important and who owns what. And then honestly, in the 3-box model, if your center of transaction isn't working, nothing else is going to work. So you're not going to release the capacity for everyone else to do that work. So the center of transactions actually should have the power. But to that point is you get a lot of power struggles and things that go on across those 3 because that's not how the work actually flows out along the value stream. Who want to take this?
Very quickly, we also had something else in our minds, which was, I think Mark calls it gravitational pull. And basically, we asked ourselves right up front, are we there to create fantastic customer experience and tailor-made for each single colleague? Are we there to create fantastic products and services and be, as a decathlete, actually even better than any decathlete, brilliant at every single product and service we have? Or are we there because we need to be efficient and effective? And obviously the truth is, and we had a huge debate about this, and the reality was you have to do all 3, but our primary one was efficiency and effectiveness. And so when you got into that, that's when we realized the 3-box model, the Ulrich model, had to change.
So the gravitational pull comes from Tracy and Rasima's work, who are kind of strategy gurus, the discipline of market leaders. Talks about 3 market positions. We apply that to functions, business units, as well as enterprises. And you have to choose the ranking on that, which then becomes part of your true north.
Quick question.
Right up here.
One of the things that you mentioned was potential measurements or how, I'm over here.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Hi, that's okay. How
Follow
are you,
the light.
exactly. How are you measuring the success of this? What are the things that outside of smiley faces and, hey, we love this, how is the business telling you this is working the way it needs to? And then where did you include the business in the redesign of the operating model? Like, how intentional were they in that process?
So let's take the second one first. That it was very intentional. I guess what I said at the beginning, having actually spent a lot of time outside HR, it was really important that, and actually most of my colleagues had also spent quite a lot of time outside HR before they got into HR. It was very intentional from the get-go that we would ask the business, what's going to work for you? I mean, so hopefully that gives, it was thought through, boom, this is what we're going to do. The other question was on KPIs or measures. Yeah, we put measures in, actually. We have them, and if you want to pay me a lot of money, I'll tell you what they are. We're not there yet, though, because actually, part of it was the efficiency, but actually it's the effectiveness that's going to make a difference. So there are certain things like, in the join stream, one of the measures is a very simple one. 6 months into the job, is that person performing brilliantly? That's a key measure, or that was a key measure. And for each of those sausages, we had, from the business, at those moments that matter, these are the measures we will judge you against. So it was almost as simple as that.
So there's other things. So in order, if you can imagine, this is a major investment, right? Then they had technology to go with it. As a call center, business isn't going to just write your checks. So part of the metric was, what's the potential savings and the compelling business case for change about being able to move, simplify work. It was never a reduction in headcount, but it ultimately ended up over, I think, 600, 700, 800 people. We're going to need less of those people to do that work. So it was all part of the equation. Every project is a little bit different based on what they're trying to do, but you can get the flavor. It's cost, it's investment, it's what's it going to do for the business.
I should also make a plug. We also invested in Glint because we recognized that was actually technology that could really help us measure at those moments that mattered for any segment, and whichever way we decided to cut it. So we invested quite heavily in Glint. They screwed us, but it was a good investment. It was a really good investment.
Glint, you owe him a drink. And there was another question, young lady here in the middle.
So, first of all, thank you for calling me a young lady. And then,
there was a quid pro quo there.
In one of your wisdoms, it said, be relentless in driving out waste. HR is the world's worst at delivering things that the business does not need.
Yeah.
And so, practically speaking, because obviously that's the hard truth that you guys had to sort of face. Tell me practically what that looked like for you, what the methodology was for that.
What, to drive it out? There were quite a lot of what we call truth sessions, where you have, someone described it, there was a presenter who described a sort of a goldfish bowl. Well, we didn't quite do it a goldfish bowl. We had line opposite HR, and there was a truth session. So tell me about the way in which we hire. Or the person would present, this is the way we hire. The line would say, it's rubbish. What do you mean it's rubbish? And it would go ping, 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 ping. And eventually the truth would be, we do need to hire, but actually the thing you're not doing, HR, we ain't doing any strategic thinking about what type of people do we need for the future. And so we had a huge conversation about whose responsibility is that. So it was these conversations that we forced that helped us then. And I have to say, my colleagues were really willing to participate in that, because someone said it this morning, this isn't just about operating model, this is about creating a very trusting culture. Go back to what I said about the guiding star. You can come to work and you can be yourself and be at your best. You can't do that if you don't have a trusting culture. So that's why the conversations were successful.
So
Do you feel that's where your moments that mattered materialized?
Yeah. Well, no, the moments that matter materialized when we did a lot of work with a lot of people saying, what are those moments that matter? That was way up front.
And don't lose the plot, as we took them through this rigorous process, it was very disciplined, but everything was about being integrated with the business, not doing designs from your belly button on out, but outside in. All that data was coming back into the room. So that brutal, what is good to great, brutal honesty, like I think Jim Collins talks about that a while back. They were that way with them. And he kept increasing the participation, so you're building a movement, not just redesigning HR.
One last thing I'd just say, just in case I don't have time later. This was a big company, well, reasonably big. But the company I've just gone to, much, much smaller. And they asked me, so what have you been doing for the last few years? And, you know, I explained a little bit. We're going to use the same in a much, much smaller organization. And then I'm going back from here, and I will go over to a company that some of you may have called Novartis. We're going to talk about that with them as well. You know, so it's everybody's interested in how do you line up your resource to create the moments that matter for colleagues. So it was almost as simple as that.
So thank you for your time. We know it's late in the day.